Good evening, everyone. We are going to get started. Thank you so much for being here. My name is David Glassner. I'm the superintendent. And this is part of tonight's program is part of a series of community engagement sessions that we are having really to help engage and educate and discuss with our community topics that we think are relevant to our community, to the work that we do in schools. And we think that these conversations will help advance the work that we're doing, as well as generate additional understanding in our community about what's happening in Shaker schools. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. This meeting or this program is being recorded. You could see Lewis in the back. We will be sharing this program by video on our website for community members who couldn't be here this evening. Also, I did want to recognize just a few people in the room and give a big thank you. Members of our communications team, Kristen Miller and Julie Hewlett, who have helped put this superintendent series together. Also, our board president, Doug Wang, who is here. Thank you so much for being here. We have a couple of other Shaker folks here, so thank you for being here. We're very excited about our topic of discussion for this evening. We'll be focusing on the work of our Office of Inclusive Excellence and Engagement, formerly known as our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We know that the work to advance equity is central to our mission here in Shaker, and also of critical importance to helping our students become thriving, productive, positive members of our global society. So we think it's really important. And it's a topic that's gotten a lot of attention nationally over the past year and a half, or at least. And so we think it's important for our community to understand where we are and what we're doing. Before I turn it over, I will put in a plug for future sessions. Tonight we'll be talking about inclusive excellence and engagement. Coming up in March, we'll be talking about our International Baccalaureate program on March 11th. And in April, we'll be focusing on detracking, April 21st. We have extra postcards here, and we'll continue to publicize these events over the coming weeks and months. With that, it's my honor to turn it over to Dr. Larry Burnley, our Chief Inclusive Excellence and Engagement Officer, and we're going to get to hear from him and other members of our team this evening. So thank you again for being here. Looking forward to our conversation.
All right, passing the mic. Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you this evening and really have an opportunity to talk about the work of our office and our team. You know, we're one part of a larger team, obviously, and as Dr. Glassner noted, there's been a lot of changes, you know, nationally, on the state level, locally, that has informed how we do the work. But the good news is that we're still committed to the work. And so we want to just have this opportunity to share with you how we've navigated some of these changes, the landscape that we find ourselves in, and welcome. And to hear from our staff. We really want this to be a conversation tonight. We don't want to just simply present to you for the next 2 hours. We're scheduled to go from 6 to 8. We may not be quite as long. But you're going to hear from our members of our staff. And after each section, there will be time for Q&A. If you want to respond to or have questions or comments relative to what each of us are sharing individually, there'll be an opportunity to do that. And at the end, there'll be a larger time for Q&A. Glad to have some of our team members here who are giving leadership to this work. And so here we go. All right. First, our staff. I'm Larry Burnley, and it's my honor to be here. Class of '74. I'm proud of that. And Kim Davis is our executive assistant, who's not with us this evening. Keith Langford, a longtime Shaker resident and who gives leadership to our family and community engagement office. Keith is under the weather today and is unable to join us, but we are very fortunate to have with us Shanita Siggers, Ms. Shanita Siggers, who is the District Family and Community Engagement Liaison. She is the newest, she's not new to Shaker by any stretch of the imagination, but she is new to this position. She's been with us in this position, I guess it's almost 2 months, a little over a month thus far. And then we're very fortunate as well to have William Warm, another Shaker alum. You're an alum as well. Yeah, that's right. Are you dare to say your class?
2003.
Okay. And William, of course, is our student program coordinator, class of 207.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so we'll hear from each of them about their various areas. So let's dive in. Oh, I was like, what happened? Okay. So let's talk about the office name change. A number of people have asked myself and other members of the district leadership team about this name change. We were the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion when I started in January of 2022. The name, as Dr. Glassner indicated, has changed to the Office of Inclusive Excellence and Engagement. But I wanted to highlight the fact that we were actually involved in exploring the possibility of changing our name even before the January 20th inauguration of our current president and some of the executive orders and that sought to really disrupt and dismantle some of the important work that we're doing. The language of diversity, equity, and inclusion and transition from some of that language was really, it wasn't unique to us. Institutions across the country have always problematized and critiqued that language. But when the changes came, we wanted to make sure that we developed a language that responded to some of the pressures that we were navigating, but at the same time makes a very clear statement about our ongoing commitment to do this work. Welcome. Our ongoing commitment to stay the course and do the work. One of the things that I brought with me to this office is the Inclusive Excellence. It's a framework that is very influential in higher education. My background in doing this work has largely been in higher education prior to coming here to Shaker. And I was so excited about the work and the commitment Shaker had, introduced that, and we talked about the work, and it was embraced by the district. And so we'll say a little bit more about what that language is and what it means for us and how it informs our work moving forward. Thank you. Now, along with the changes that in terms of name and how we responded to not only some of the political pressures that emerged under the current administration, just navigating some of the financial pressures that the district is navigating to make sure that we're stewarding those resources appropriately so we can deliver the highest level of education for our students. So you'll see, I'm not going to go into details of this. This is what the organizational chart reflects how we emerged by the time, after about a 2-year period here, and then how we're situated currently. Our primary areas of focus have remained. We have the number of people associated with the office and the work that we're doing has changed, but we are now, as you see, my title there, the executive assistant. We continue to have the diversity, equity, and inclusion program coordinator, which is Will's position. And it's actually now student program coordinator. Then family engagement, under Will, we'll have Bridges. He'll say more about this as the Bridges coordinator, the MAC building advisors that he oversees as well. And then there's SCORE that he'll talk more about. And then we have family engagement, and then Shanita will talk more about that work as well. But the mission is that, we've had changes in name, there's some, transitions in staff construction, but the mission remains the same. And I want to say just a little bit about inclusive excellence and what that actually means. I'm not going to read this, but to say that inclusive excellence as a framework makes the statement that for an organization to effectively do the work that is really driving our mission, and that is to recognize historic and persistent gaps of academic achievement that disproportionately impacts and affects certain populations across the community. In order for us to do that well, the commitment of inclusive excellence has to permeate every aspect of an organization. Nothing goes untouched by the organization in terms of our stewardship of funds, our professional development and learning, how we teach, what we teach, how we collect and analyze data, how students are seeing themselves and others at the core of their curriculum, how we recruit and retain staff. I mean, nothing goes untouched, right? The quality of our facilities and our physical spaces. So we use inclusive excellence as a lens to assess and evaluate ourselves as we deliver on our mission. The mission remains the same. And again, I will read this: a purposeful development and utilization of the organization's resource to enhance professional learning and the development and execution of its mission. Organizationally, it means establishing an environment that challenges each member of the organization to contribute learning and knowledge development for the purpose of advancing this mission. This is not a sprint. This is really a marathon. Shaker has been committed to this work long before I think most of us arrived here. It's taken on a form that is really receives a lot of national attention, certainly local attention, and we continue to learn as we grow. We've not arrived. You know, I'm reminded of Dr. King when he was asked the question many years ago. In fact, there's a plaque at the University of Dayton where I worked before I arrived here, and there's a plaque. Dr. King spoke there in 1963, and he was asked the question what he thought of the state of race relations. And he said, and the plaque reads as thus: we've come a long, long way, but we have a long, long way to go. And I think that's true for our nation, certainly our global community, and it's true for Shaker as well. The good news is, here at Shaker, we are on that journey. Despite the challenges that we are navigating, that journey continues. So part of the transition that we've undergone over the past year, there have been a number of transitions and number of transitions that have impacted our portfolios. With regard to the office, some of those, and these are emergent changes that have impacted how we're spending our time and some of our human and financial resources. I now serve as the compliance officer for the district, and that's really given oversight to a number of things in terms of from looking at the district and the work that we do through a compliance lens. Primarily, for me, it expresses itself in receiving and responding to a number of complaints that may emerge. Work very closely with our director of human resources, Dr. Tiffany Joseph, but also with all of our senior leaders in building leadership as we navigate and respond to reports that come to our attention. One of the new developments that we have developed, that we have really initiated over the past year, really over the past half year, is the Bias Incident Reporting and Investigation Protocol. One of the things that I observed when I arrived here was that one of the things we did not have in place was a very easily accessible place where a person who may have experienced personally or observed some form of bias or harassment or retaliation or other forms of discrimination to report it. Now, the district has always had sound policy to direct how we respond to, what we respond to, clearly defining what are some of the various areas of discrimination that could occur, identifying protected classes and identities. But I would ask people from time to time, if something were to happen to you personally, what would you do? Do you know what to do? Where would you go? How would you report it? And the answers have been pretty consistently, persons not being quite clear of how to report that or where to report that. They knew they could talk to someone, but they didn't know where they could tell their story or even having an anonymous way of reporting what they experienced or what they observed. So we created a protocol that's available online. It was launched with the help of the Office of Communications and many others. We instituted this and launched it in September, August of 25. And now you can go to any page in our website and find a place to report something you've experienced and or observed that was troubling. And so myself and Dr. Joseph, who I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we co-chair or co-convene a diverse group of staff to receive and respond to these reports. It's kind of still fledgling in its development and implementation, but we're learning a lot. But people are using it, and that's good. I mean, people know where to go. A quick story, there was a student at the high school who reported that they had experienced bullying. And I remember receiving the case, interviewing the students. Actually, there were a couple of students. And I said, well, how did you know how to use this? Did someone tell you about it? They said, no, I went to Chat GPT and I put it there that I live in Shaker and how to know how to report what I just experienced. And they report that AI led them to this protocol, which was pretty interesting. So it's a work in progress, and we're learning as we go. I now also chair the policy committee for the Board of Education, and along with my executive assistant, who's really done a really wonderful job in helping us provide the kind of support for the committee and for the board and giving leadership to that group. Professional learning is probably one of, I think, the biggest challenges that we have in terms of the transitions that we're making. There is, resolute commitment, from the leadership across the board to develop and deliver professional learning that helps build capacity for instructors and leadership at the district and building levels to give the kind of equity-minded leadership needed to effectively advance our strategic objectives in such a way that there's measured progress. But professional learning is one that it can be very expensive in terms of having the kind of infrastructure needed to effectively help our professionals to develop the kind of capacities to give the kind of leadership needed to do this work. And I think we're learning, again, as we go. The challenges that we're facing financially certainly took a hit in our ability to sustain the infrastructure we were building to actually deliver on that. But again, the commitment is there for us to continue to do that work. I know there's a number of things going on at the building level through our coordinators, through our principals, through building instructors, and at the senior level. The senior level, we have something that we call Courageous Conversations at the senior level that we initiated 2 years ago. And it's a space where we're doing a common read, where we have a safe, confidential space to lean deeply into issues of power and privilege and race, and other kinds of systemic realities where we're sharing some of our own stories. And so grateful for the superintendent to prioritize making that commitment, given all the things that's demanding our attention as far as time. But we continue to be on that journey as we learn how to be equity-minded leaders on this journey. I'll say a couple of other things that I'm going to hand the mic off. The South Africa Cultural Exchange. In 2024, in the spring of 2024, we were privileged to take 22 students and 11 staff to South Africa during spring break. It was a trip that was developed by a team of us who was really, we were really committed to, well, let me back up. When I arrived, I looked at the international study abroad opportunities our students had, and I noted that there was no real opportunity to do anything on the continent of Africa. In my career, I've been privileged to do quite a bit of work in South Africa over the years, and so I proposed this idea to Dr. Glassner, a partnership with the foundation who embraced this idea, and we had a phenomenal experience. I wish I could tell you more about that here, but it was one that we stepped back and said this is something that we would envision for us to be able to do hopefully every 3 years to become a regular part of the international study experience cycle available to students. And so currently we're planning for the second, we call SACE 2.0 for the spring of 2027. So we're really excited about that as well. And then finally, regional and national and international collaboration. We work very closely across our office through either athletics, through my work, through the FACE network, through the First Ring. If you're familiar with the First Ring school districts around Cleveland, working collaboratively with colleagues, sharing information, supporting our work. Certainly at the national level through MSAN, the Multicultural Student Achievement Network, for which Shaker is a founding member. And Dr. Glassner has a leadership role as giving leadership to the title, David? President of the Governing Board, giving leadership at that level. And international in so many different ways. You will know that we're an international baccalaureate district, but through our office, that international collaboration is tied to our partnership with Gauteng School District in Johannesburg, Langa Cultural Center in the Langa Township in Cape Town, South Africa, and one with the University of the Western Cape. We were not able to fit in an itinerary when we went for the trip, but we've been in communication with them about having that university being involved with our student experience moving forward. So I'm going to stop there. We're going to hand off, but I'm going to pause for just a second to see if there are any questions at all, any reactions to anything that I've shared here this afternoon. Like I said, there'll be opportunity for Q&A later, but after each of our presentations, we will give you a chance to talk. So any reactions, any questions at all? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to hand it off to William Warren.
Oh, yeah, I've seen enough content creators rock this thing. I've been waiting my whole life to do this. Good evening, good people. I'm Will Warren, Student Program Coordinator through the Office of Inclusive Excellence and Engagement. I'm glad that new name kind of rolls off the tongue smoothly, and you can also say it without the acronym so that folks don't ask you the follow-up question of what does that stand for. I'm in my third year, Shaker Heights High School, class of 2007. It is awesome and wonderful to be back. It is an honor and a pleasure to work with hundreds of students across all 7 buildings in the district. In different forms of student programming, different levels of engagement, engaging with not just our students, our staff that serve as advisors, building leadership, which I have continuing to build relationships with building leaderships in all the buildings across the districts, because when we're all, I think, in collaboration and we're all on one accord regarding how student programming supports student academic success, how it's helps support students and their experience in a Shaker. I'm all about that, because a number of these programs, as you'll hear about, have been long-time programs within the schools, within the district, some of which I was even a part of as a student. I do want to say before I go forward, I do want to thank Holly McCormick, Shaker Schools Foundation, Central Office and Admin. They give so much support to these programs, not just to sustain them and support them, but also to make sure that they are at the main focus and on the front of folks' minds when people are asking about what is there to do for my student in Shaker from the time that they start on throughout the time that they eventually graduate. Minority Achievement Committee, Max Scholars Program, long-time program here in the district, going in year 36. Little known fact, I won't go too deep into it, but Reverend Jesse Jackson just passed yesterday. And if it had not been for the Reverend Jesse Jackson and his work with the Rainbow Coalition and Push Excel, we don't have the Max Scholars Program. I'll share more about that offline if anybody wants to get the history lesson there. But that program has a focus on our students of color. Historically, our African American students, both male and female. Historically, the program started in the high school and made its way to the middle school, Woodbury at the time for 5th and 6th, and eventually now is in all 7 buildings in the district that would include all the elementary schools. The purpose of which is to encourage peer-to-peer mentorship and leadership with a focus on academic achievement. The purpose really is to build up these students who have been marginalized, who may not necessarily know each other or have these supports anywhere else, to have them there in the building to support their learning, provide them experiences in and outside of the building, and give them something to aspire and advance up through as they continue on in their Shaker experience. So several of our scholars and sister scholars who will graduate this year have been in the program since they were in the 4th or 5th grade, which is awesome. Kind of wrapped up into that program is the MSAN Experience Multicultural Student Achievement Network that Dr. Burnley just mentioned. So MSAN is an organization that includes several different districts across the country. A lot of these districts have a similar makeup to the Shaker community in terms of the balance of students of different backgrounds and diversities and races and whatnot. And then also kind of how they're located, right? So we're in a ring suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. I consider it a major city. It's got 3 major sports teams. It's a major city to me. But a lot of these other school districts are maybe centered around some other major cities and or big time large state universities, right? And so their big organization or their big event is their student conference. So we got hundreds of students coming from these different school districts around the country to not only just to come together to learn more about the world around them and connect, but also to participate in research. MSAN is really big on research and how to be able to utilize numbers and percentages to kind of explain why equity and social justice work is important and how it has an effect on students starting as young as middle school, right? Every year, the MSAN Student Conference is held at different places around the country. This past year, or this past fall in November, we sent several students from the high school and a couple advisors down to Arlington, Virginia. It was hosted by the school district down there in Arlington, not in Arlington, but near Arlington. And they got a chance to not only see some of the bright lights at DC, they also go on a college visit. And this year they were able to go to Howard University, the historic HBCU. And at this conference, students work on what's called an action plan. And in that action plan, they are taking a very honest and real assessment of their school or of their school district, and they are saying, this is what we need as either a district or as a building to encourage this. And it could be more positive school culture. It could be belonging. It could be related to embracing that diversity that's in that building. And that action plan is developed by students, and then the expectation is those students take that action plan back to their district. They go in front of their own school board and they make their case, and they also communicate and collaborate with their building leaders in their schools and school districts to put that plan in place. Because the whole point is to then, once that plan is in place, now we can kind of assess how that plan has had a positive, neutral, or maybe in some cases a negative effect on the building. So that's kind of our component of MSAN. This fall coming up, fall 2026, Shaker Heights School District will host the upcoming MSAN School District or MSAN Student Conference. So right now we're in the wee stages of planning that. Student group on race relations, better known as SCORE, 40 plus years around here in the district and in the community. SCORE is another student-led peer-to-peer group where I, as the advisor, collaborate with the leaders of these groups, known as my core leaders. It's about 15 juniors and seniors who have been in SCORE for 1, 2, some of them 3, 4 years. And those core leaders lead their own group of about 10 to 12 or 13 SCORE members. They meet in their homes, or they pick a meeting space to somewhere to meet. Some of them meet right here in the library every week. And they are having very honest and candid, and to mention, to borrow one of Dr. Burnley's phrases, courageous conversations on the topic of race. It's an intentional conversation about race and race relations, not just to stir up trouble or to, get everybody's emotions all hot, but it's really meant so that everyone who is a member of this organization, who has their own lens and perspective, can participate and contribute. The whole purpose is twofold. One, the purpose is for students to be able to express themselves and their voices in a very safe and vulnerable environment. And then also, it also helps those students to develop activities to facilitate in classrooms of their younger peers. So we go into 4th grade, 6th grade, and 8th grade classrooms 2 to 3 times a year. We actually just finished up with day 2. We'll conclude day 2 next week with 8th grade, and then we'll start plotting on day 3 to wrap it all up before and around spring break. SCORE has navigated definitely some challenges organizationally, but since I've been the advisor, my main focus really has been to support the leaders and the members in whatever it is that they want to be able to talk about and emphasize as a point in their activities with in those classrooms, and then also collaborate with teachers and building leadership about what it ultimately they would like their students to get out of this experience, and how their students are communicating what they're seeing, what they're hearing, and through the different mediums and channels that they're doing so. So imagine you're in a classroom and there's high school kids with big SCORE t-shirts on, and they got a little huddle of 4th or 6th graders, and you're hearing an 8-year-old kid, 9-year-old kid, or an 11-year-old, 12-year-old kid talk about something that they seen on CNN, or talk about something that they heard on a TikTok page that's related to this, that, and the third. It's very, very interesting because it gives you a glimpse into what they're perceiving and how their minds are forming around what they're receiving, and also how they apply it to the communities that they're in. They'll be very candid and honest, and I've heard it. If you ever get a chance, trust me, it's an amazing experience. Also within SCORE are some opportunities and activities for out of the building learning, community service learning, and I'll kind of go a little overview of that as I get to the end here. Shaker Heights High School Bridges, that program is an academic support program where we put together a cohort of students of color from diverse backgrounds, diverse learning styles, who are current ninth graders who are rising to their sophomore year. We recruit them second semester of their ninth grade year. We take a lot of teacher recommendations and staff recommendations from the high school building about students who are interested in challenging themselves in 10th grade by taking their first advanced placement course, or AP for short. The first two AP courses you can take at the high school are AP Bio and AP US History, acronized as APUSH. So one of the APUSH teachers, Joseph Konopinski, I work very closely with him, and David Peak, who is a school counselor, to identify and select a cohort of usually between 15, max 20 students who are enrolled in AP US History, and we receive them for 2 weeks in the summertime. And in those 2 weeks, Joe, Dave, and I help support them as they learn pretty much the first month of AP US History. It is an equitable way to kind of give them a boost, but also to give them support in building this bridge, hence the term bridges, to build this bridge to let them know that from where they started off at and where they'll end up, it's completely different, but they are being supported, they are being challenged, but they're also being encouraged to take this step, because an AP course in 10th grade is no joke, especially AP US History. That's where you first learn about document-based questions, aka DBQs, SAQs, which are short answer questions. You got LEQs, which is long extended questions, and then the National History Day project, which takes months to research and then complete and then present. And what we have found in Bridges is that so many of these students that participate in this experience, where they're in a cohort, they're getting to know each other, they're using each other as support, they're leaning on each other, they eventually want to be in NHD together. They go on through the year and they push each other to continue on and to do their best and to push through the hard times. And that gives them really some skin in the game and some encouragement to continue on to stay enrolled in some of those higher level courses. A lot of those students probably wouldn't have that experience or wouldn't try that had it not been for Bridges. You can go to the next slide. In my role as student program coordinator, since I am in the high school majority of the time, I do provide a lot of support for a lot of things related to the high school. Our Sankofa student organization, which I have a hard time describing it because there's nothing to compare it to. A diverse group of about 25, 35 students are involved in this production. And the production takes place during Black History Month. But just aside from that production, they spend so many months writing the play, selecting the music, choreographing dance moves, choreographing other types, choreographing this entire production, but also learning about their history, learning that the history for Black people in America doesn't just start at chattel slavery, that there's a whole entire history that they may have been miseducated on about their roots in Africa. And connecting that to this international baccalaureate curriculum experience that we want our students to have in Shaker. This is a group to be a part of it. There's no tryout. You don't need to get selected. There's no GPA requirement, but we support those students because a lot of those students that we have in Sankofa, some of them may have been on the consequence tier. Some of them may have not been doing well before they joined the group. They get a chance to see themselves and for others to see them in such a different light on that stage performing. If you get a chance, Sankofa production this year is next Friday and Saturday. The theme is the legacy of Black brilliance. And I'm telling you, every year it blows it out of the water. It is an incredible way to view our students in their most honest and talented light. When we have so many talented students in this district, I mean, honestly, the level of talent that some of these students have in all of these student groups continues to just blow me away. And Sankofa is just one of those. I really do kind of help support some of the students in the building with whatever they may need in the classroom, making sure they know where to go or who to talk to, for rehearsals and practice and whatnot, and then even just kind of supporting them as they go through their out of the building experiences. And again, I'll get to that point at the end. Black Athletes in Action, BAIA, formerly known as Black Athletes Giving Support, or BAGS, BAGS. This is a group that, if you're familiar with kind of how it works on the college campus, kind of like a student athlete advisory committee, this is a group that kind of takes its inspiration from a visit to the Black Student Athlete Summit that occurs every year, that is sponsored by several different member institutions and usually held at a big time college every year. This is a chance for our athletes of color to form an organization that they get to lead, mentor, and inspire others, and also talk very candidly with their teammates and with their classmates about the things that they experience as an athlete of color or as the only athlete of a certain diversity group off the field of play. And then it also encourages, they also encourage all their other student athletes to then become advocates for others while they're on the field of play. As a coach and as a former athlete here at Shaker, I'm well versed and well experienced into the type of things that can happen on the field of play, whether it be racial slurs, whether from players, whether it be something inappropriate said in the stands, whether it be just trying to navigate the life of a student athlete from having to get up at 5 a.m. to make it to zero period strength and conditioning class and having to stay late because your practice runs late or your game runs late. These are all different types of things that our athletes are helping to mentor other student athletes in. And also, again, trying to service the whole student athlete within that, making sure that they're exposed to leadership opportunities, opportunities to serve their communities, and opportunities to showcase themselves as good student athlete stewards and representatives of Shaker Heights. I do support a lot of the high school PBIS, which is Positive Behavior Intervention Staff for Support, and Student Conflict Resolution. I will get asked by building leadership in several different buildings to either be involved in or talk directly to students that may have been involved in conflict, and that conflict may have to do with something along any of those diversity, equity, or inclusion lines. I've been in conversations with a young fourth grader because he didn't understand why he, as a white male, wasn't invited by his peers to Max Scholars. And so I sat with him and I explained what the group is and why it was important. He was a very intelligent young dude. And at the end, what I told him was, if you got a friend that's in Scholars, ask him, can you tag along to a meeting? So you can check it out and see what they got going on in there. So then you can go back to your buddies and say, hey, this is what I learned. This is what they're doing in there. And this is why it's really cool and necessary. But in that PBIS role, kind of helping to make sure that student programs is being represented in terms of how to build positive school culture. I'm lucky enough to have stepped into this role when several of the APs and other building leadership at the high school also stepped into their role. So we've been able to kind of grow together just by all coming in together, sharing our ideas and collaborating on different things to continue to make our building the best that it can be for our students. Supporting building leadership, like I said, trying to make relationships as best I can. What's really cool about having gone there and now being back there and working there is there's still a few folks who remember me as thankfully my reputation hadn't been stained by anything stupid that I did between 1999 and 2007. However, being able to give a different perspective to those students, I can empathize with them if a particular teacher's syllabus is hard and how to navigate it and what they should do in order to, try to get more success in that classroom, directing them towards resources, listening to teachers when they have a recommendation for a student in a certain program, or if they say, hey, I know you got a kid that's going on a SCORE visit, but right now their kind of grade is kind of shaky in my classroom, they probably shouldn't go on this visit, here's why. And now we have that relationship and collaboration built to where I can go to the student and say, hey, Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so is advocating for you to be here. This is why you should be here. Don't forget that even though you're a part of this organization as a student, your focus is still on your academic progress. Being a part of also supporting bias incident reporting and investigation protocol, Dr. Burnley went over that piece as well. I do want to make sure I go back to a point that I was trying to make earlier that I didn't want to get ahead of myself over, which is the amount of in-district and out-of-district experiences that student programming provides to those students who are a part of any of those programs. So what we do in Bridges at the end of the summer program, after 2 weeks of learning and studying, we take the students up to Detroit to go to the Charles Wright Museum of African American History. And then we also go to a historically black church in Detroit, in inner city Detroit, that has a underground railroad experience in it where they have volunteers put on an entire production so that the students can be a part of and experience what it might have felt like to be a person trying to make its freedom during that time period. And I mean, it comes complete with sounds and it's a whole production that they've probably never seen before. And again, it just exposes them again to opportunities for learning, for development, for perspective building. We took several of the Max Scholars from Onaway and Fernway, Sankofa students from the high school today, went to Playhouse Square to view their Black History Month production, which is oddly enough entitled Sankofa, an Epic Adventure, being put on by a local dance crew. Again, so many different experiences for these students. If your student or somebody you know that has a student is in the district, student programming is an excellent way to enhance their academic experience. It's a great way for them to get to know their peers outside of the classroom or outside of the building. It's an excellent way for them to be a part of something that sustains and that lasts and that builds a lot of character, that builds their leadership. That it doesn't just pad their college resume either. These are experiences that legitimately help them build bonds, make friendships that will continue to last and continue to sustain them. As we know, a lot of our children are siloed with a screen, kind of in isolation. Student programming is an excellent way to kind of encourage them because as a parent of 2 school-aged children, a lot of times I have to gently nudge and encourage them to do a few things that may be out of their comfort zone. It's a fantastic way to get them experience with being uncomfortable and becoming comfortable with that feeling. And I'll pause right now if anybody's got any quick questions while you view some of the lovely pictures. This is our annual SCORE picture that I do with all our members. We're about 180 strong at the high school. Over here is a picture with black athletes giving support from a couple of years ago. That fella right here in the middle, if you're a fan of the show All American, that is Spencer Paysinger, who is the writer and inspiration for the main character on that show. And then up top here is from our summertime Max Scholar Summer Enrichment Program. I believe they're at the park and they went on an experience to learn about urban farming at a place called, is it Riddall? Riddall, yeah. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how some of the programs and experiences you've talked about that seem to be more geared towards like 4th grade through especially the high school?
The question was how some of these programs that are geared probably towards, it seems like they're geared towards starting in 4th grade and up, how some of these programs or even folks in these programs how they can reach out to younger students, starting now that we have a building exclusively for pre-K on up through K1, 2, and 3. And that's a fantastic question. I've been in conversations with SCORE about how we can make an impact with students younger than 4th grade. From the historical aspect, SCORE was set to intervene with students in grades 4 and 6 because that historically was their last year before changing buildings. So now that our building structure is a bit different in terms of being K-5 in elementary, 6 to 8 in middle years, in middle school. So we've even had conversations about what it would look like for a group like SCORE to go into a 2nd grade classroom, how to adapt and edit our curriculum to kind of to mirror what it is that they're learning. What's great about having the IB curriculum is that that curriculum gives us those learner profiles. So if there's a specific learner profile that in that 2nd grade classroom that is being pushed or talked about at that time, we now have the opportunity to adapt that profile into the SCORE curriculum to kind of be able to mirror what it is that they're learning. Now, that's going to take some collaboration with teachers and instructional coaches and building leadership in order to make sure that, number one, the impact that we want it to have is felt. Number two, honestly, what is understood about race and race relations at that age. And then getting our students kind of used to and prepared for having conversations with students that age, like, you know, the types of questions that you have to ask. They have to be open-ended. They can't just be like yes or no questions with kids at that age. So that's one thing that we've definitely discussed. I think with all of those programs, the opportunity to intervene and to have direct intervention at that level is there, right? We just have to figure out how best to adapt it. And also, to be quite honest, we got to also make sure that when we're doing so, the intended impact happens, right? And to make sure that we're in alignment with their academic plan at that point in time, and to make sure that with that impact being had, that we're not just coming from a standpiece of listen to us and do what we say so that you can be successful. We want to make sure we're going in there and listening to them as well, no matter what age they are. You know, I've having worked in a K-8 building before I got to Shaker, I was very, very shocked and amazed at the type of conversations that happen in the kindergarten classroom. Man, those kids talk, and they are well informed, and they got a lot to say. I guess the first thing that I think of in terms of intended impact is probably making sure that we're having a conversation has to be had with a teacher or with building leadership that is way more experienced with that age than I am or that the student leaders are, and kind of understanding, okay, to what level are we able to go? To what level do they understand the concept of race, culture, identity? Because once they get into 6th and 8th grade, we make sure that we're defining, for them so that they understand orientation and a couple of other key terms that kind of help drive some of those activities to where they learn. So that's kind of the intention that we want to make sure that we're doing. We want to make sure we land the plane. I don't want to talk over them, and I don't want to lose them.
Sure.
Definitely, I agree.
It would look very different.
I agree.
Yeah, I was just and maybe it's you, Dr. Rowley, just thinking about broadening out Sarah's question on assessing the impact. Like, I think the activities sound incredible and amazing, and the opportunities are being provided. How do you think about the outcomes that it's driving to, and measuring those, taking the lessons from what's working and what isn't from a more, I don't know, quantitative or qualitative outcomes perspective?
Sure, it's a good question. So I'll use Bridges kind of as a quantitative example because Joe and Sarah Davis, who originated this Bridges program about 10 years ago, were really intentional about keeping that data. And from that data, they were tracking the amount of students in Bridges, the grades that they got in APUSH, the classes, the AP or IB classes that they enrolled in 11th grade and in 12th grade, the scores that they got on the AP tests from APUSH for U.S. history, and then also tracking where they went to school and the amount of scholarship money that they received, to try again to not just to to justify it. You kind of use it as a marketing tool and a promotions tool, but also to, like you said, to assess that quantitative impact that, that justifies whatever the expense is or whatever the cost is or the time commitment to confirm that it works, that there's real data and real value there. So that's just kind of one such example.
I think there.
Yeah,
No, I think there is an opportunity, though, to your point about assessment. One of the things Will and I have talked about is, for instance, the MAC program. What is the impact of MAC? What data do we have, can we point to say MAC is having a particular impact or outcome as a result of a kid going through there? So what's the MAC kid experience versus the kid who's not in MAC? Is there a variance between, how they achieve, what they're learning from it? That's an opportunity for us to develop methods of actually collecting that. And we're currently not doing it at that point. But I will say, in terms of Bridges, we are looking at data in terms of their movement through AP courses, and there's data. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Sure.
And how that's even changed over the past couple of years in terms of how those cohorts have been influenced, as evidenced by their performance in some of the AP.
Sure. So Joe keeps data on all the students in the building who are in AP US history, because it's Joe Konopinski and Sarah Davis. They're the only two that teach that class. And so they have data from the students who are in Bridges and their mean AP test score versus the students who were not in Bridges, their mean AP test score. Again, assessing that impact that 2-week course and that cohort that meets monthly or bi-monthly, what that has on the eventual outcome of them not just having success in AP US history, but also how they then perform on that AP test, which we know historically has its own biases and challenges and whatnot. For me, one of the best indicators is on that personal level, getting to know those students, building that rapport and making that relationship and earning their trust, so that as they go on, continuing to make sure I check in with them to say, okay, hey, I see, what are you taking? Talking with their counselor about, and even some of their parents, and making sure we're building a culture of support around where they want to go in their academic journey. And frankly, making sure that students' feeling of belonging and that students' sense of confidence in academics and their ability to make relationships with those teachers and utilizing their resources and having knowledge of where to go for help with here, and developing all of those things that we know to make them successful. Those are also very, very important. And some of those things numbers can't always tell you. So there's definitely a balance there.
Yeah, I think I might just emphasize one of the things that Sarah was talking about also. Like, if there's data that suggests like Bridges is providing that on-ramp to excellence at that 9th and 10th grade level, and if there are some of those lessons that can be applied down to even like the more junior levels where you already start to see some of those gaps emerge, feels like that would be a valuable thing to apply, and to actually say, should we wait until somebody's in 9th grade to say, hey, you're doing an outstanding job, let me support you to achieve the excellence that you're capable of, down in that 2nd, 4th, 6th grade levels as well.
I very much appreciate this conversation. I think the other thing I'm thinking about is how do we measure the impact and the value of these programs and these opportunities for all students. For example, we do give climate and culture survey to our students that asks specific questions around sense of belonging, ability for students to have respectful conversations and relationships with people who are different than them. we see, so that helps give us an indication. It's not just the students who are directly involved in these programs. I think we do some of this already, and thinking about how we can expand opportunities to kind of measure the impact. I also definitely agree the idea of trying to take the lessons from these programs, like Will said, these programs really support, enhance, enrich students' academic experiences. That's definitely true at the youngest grade levels too. And I think we have room to grow in that area, and also this does inform that.
Yeah, I'd be curious to understand, like, that sense of belonging feels like one of the things that's come through over and over and over again, which is like one of the things that I felt when I was at Shaker. It's one of the things that I love about the broader community. I'd be curious to see like how that correlates to, or if that has like drives an impact on some of the areas where there's challenges, like chronic absenteeism and like making sure that kids are showing up into like the classroom themselves. I think it'd be like something interesting to explore, like how these programs could drive that impact.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
In the interest of time, I want to make sure we're giving, I know she's just itchy to get up there. And we'll have some more time for Q&A.
Sure. I want to pass it on here to Shanita Siggers, District Family and Community Engagement Liaison.
So, I am Shanita Siggers. I am new to the Family and Community Engagement Department. I am a Shaker alumni. I have a son that is currently in the 7th grade. I have served and wore many hats. I was the PTO president for the middle school. I serve on the Shaker Heights board for the youth center. I also serve on the board for Impact, and I am also a Max Scholar advisor. So Dr. Burnley have said that Keith is under the weather, so I have chose to pick up for Keith, and I have created a cheat sheet. I'm not fluent yet in my position, so I have created a cheat sheet. Family, community, and engagement. So each district's family and community engagement looks different. Our mission here is to collaborate with groups and organizations to develop outreach activities, programs, and partnerships designed to foster student achievement and engage parents in educational process, promoting success for all students. Engagement and collaboration. So our district continues to strengthen collaboration across all school buildings to deepen partnership between families and staff. A key focus that we're improving is communication, especially two-way communication. This means not sharing information with families, but truly listening to their needs and working together to support student success and increase family engagement. My notes are a little bit off, but district volunteers. The FACE office also managed our district volunteer background checks by BCI and FBI screenings. This ensures that everyone is working with our students and staff have been properly screened, and safety remains our top priority. We strongly encourage parents, families, students, and community members to get involved, like tonight, both inside and outside of the classroom, join PTO, and also support through reading support, sharing career experience, and helping with school events. District level liaison and special support. So we work with McKinney-Vento, foster students, and champions. With the support of Mr. Langford, our FACE office works to remove barriers for students experiencing housing instability, ensuring immediate enrollment with uninterrupted attendance. We also support foster youth by advocating for stability and timely school access. Additionally, we partner with Champions Before and After Care program to provide a safe educational environment for students who care for their needs and cares beyond school hours. Finally, resources and access. The FACE office plays an important part in role encouraging families to advocate for their children's education. We invite families to participate in district level decision making by attending meetings like this one, joining PTOs, serving school committees, and providing valuable feedback to help guide district decisions. Finally, the FACE department offers our website. I have some resource pamphlets. Only thing that has changed is Trina Jones. She's no longer with us, but in that position, she's no longer in that position. She's still with us. So I have bought some pamphlets if you guys would like to use these to know more about our department. And then there's a QR code here too if you haven't been fingerprinted or you need more information about our department. Any questions?
If I could just build on a few things.
Sure, you may.
And thank you.
Of course.
Excellent. She just started. She's running in there.
Pass the mic.
I need the mic. Recently, we did with the help of an organization at Ohio State University, an audit of FACE. We learned quite a bit, and one of the outcomes of that was understanding that we needed to really enhance how we're communicating the role of FACE, its mission, what it's for, both in terms of how we're positioning ourselves to listen to stakeholders at the building level, parents, family, staff, and across the district, and how we're communicating to them. Now, one of the outcomes from some of the decisions that had to be made because of some of the financial challenges that we've been navigating is to kind of rethink a model that we had in place. We had building liaisons. These are full-time staff that were receiving stipends to do the work. And one of the outcomes, which I think was really a positive outcome, was that we kind of backed off of that model. But Dr. Evans and others really pointed out that there are people in the building, quite frankly, that we could better utilize and collaborate with to support the work that FACE does and see themselves. But one of the things that we had to do, and Keith has given leadership to this, Keith Langford, is to really do a better job in communicating what is FACE. I think there was a lack of some understanding consistently across the district about FACE's mission, and then how buildings can come alongside, being informed by a better understanding of that mission, and how we can work more collaboratively to support families and students going through a number of challenges as they are navigating life and certainly navigating the school system. McKinney-Vento, if you're not familiar with that, the McKinney-Vento Act is a federal act that really provides protections for students and families that are homeless. And that, with the shifting, again, stresses that families are experiencing in our current economy, those numbers ebb and flow, but at times those numbers increase. So how do we work, again, more collaboratively in ways that are aligned with policy and in ways in which that we are aligning not only with resources within the district and at the building level, regional and state resources as well, doing a better job in harnessing those and accessing those resources in support of families. It's quite a task. I mean, these are families that are dealing with all types of challenges, many of which some of us may even take for granted. But it's impacting, these situations impact the student experience, right? The kind of supports that some of us might take for granted a student might receive at home aren't there. But again, working more effectively with staff across the district in a more harmonious, synchronistic way to deliver services is something we're working on. And I think we're making a little headway in that area. Yeah. So those are the things I wanted to add. Are there other questions? Any questions for Ms. Siggers? I know she's anxious to get in front of you again No, I'm kidding. Any other questions, comments, insights? Yes.
So I did want to go back to a bridging program. Understanding that that data has been collected, right, on how these students are doing in AP history. It would be interesting to see what that data is showing. It'd be nice to hear that. And I think it's already been said, being able to expand that or take lessons from that and apply it in other areas. And I'm wondering is there any opportunity, and I know the district is really working through a lot of financial challenges right now, but if there is any way to expand that program to address or support our students in math?
It's a great question. When Bridges first started back in 2016, Bridges existed in math, science, and social studies, as well as there was support there from English language arts. The current state of Bridges exists primarily just in AP US history, not as kind of the final frontier, but in order to sustain that, we would want teachers to be committed to providing that 2-week summer piece and then providing space for their own Bridges cohort to meet with them every so often to track that progress and to support them. The issue being that at the time that I took on the role, teachers requested an additional planning period during their day to be able to also plot out their and plan out their Bridges cohort schedule with I'm on the different period schedules and block schedulings that we've had over the years kind of didn't allow for that to happen anymore. However, I've been in communication with Isaiah Wyatt, our new principal. He is definitely in support of bringing back Bridges Math, as is several individuals in the building who are willing to participate in Bridges Math, Bridges Science, Bridges Language and Literature. So we're kind of working on what that will look like, hopefully in the very near future. So you are very right in that aspect. It's definitely needed.
Good to hear. And then I had a question about SCORE. I'm sorry. How are the SCORE leaders educated in race relations history of the country? How are they prepared to be able to share or facilitate conversation around those topics?
Sure. So I'll answer that question in 2 parts. The first part is I will reference a conversation that Dr. Burnley engaged the core leaders with maybe a few months ago, where he asked each of them, what is the state of race relations? And had a conversation surrounded by the idea of how did we arrive here? How have we arrived here? The second part, in terms of how they glean that information and what do they learn, a lot of it comes from the conversations that they had as young SCORE members from previous core leaders in those groups, where the leader would say, okay, here's a current event that is related to race relations that's going on. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about the facts. Let's talk about perspectives. That then leads to them researching on their own. From my vantage point as an advisor, we do a retreat in the summertime every year where we spend an entire day just kind of talking about what we want to do for the upcoming year. And we also intentionally have these conversations that are led by race. So we've had Dr. Shamaria Arki from Kent State, who is the head of their Pan-African Studies Department. She has come during a retreat to kind of present to the students about being an upstander and a bystander, referencing Dr. Bettina Love's speech on the difference between an ally and a co-conspirator. We've watched Ibrahim X. Kendi's Stamped from the beginning, which tells a very authentic and unbiased history of not just race relations, but just the history, the story of the creation of the country, right? Starting at chattel slavery, and then having a conversation about miseducation versus re-education, and just using a couple of other different sources to then inform them about race and race relations, so that honestly they can draw their own conclusions and then take that information, apply it to their lens and perspective, and go back to their groups and then have that same conversation to then educate them.
Let me just respond to that also, if I may. 'Cause 'Cause I want to expand that understanding of history and how it informs how we show up in our contemporary settings. That's not just a question for the students. That's also a question for staff and leadership. You know, my colleagues, you know, they've heard me say this, not that it's new to them, but I've said it often, and I'll repeat it here. The commitment we've made is to, and I use this language fairly often, is to understand, disrupt, and dismantle systemic racism and other forms of systemic oppression. Now that's a very intentional process, and the first step in that process is understanding. So what I've said, and I continue to believe deeply, it's one thing, and it's noble, to recognize historic and persistent disparities that's disproportionately impacting different social identities in certain populations. It's one thing to say where we see these disparities, and it's another thing to say that we're committed to closing these disparities. I've argued that we cannot do that effectively unless we understand what historically has occurred that has created the disparities in the first place. That means we all have to engage our miseducation. We all have degrees from, you know, all kind of letters behind our names, but this system of education is set up to sustain itself in terms of traditional and persistent, positions of power and privilege for particular groups, right? And it's not just one identity, it's multiple identities and how they intersect, right? And so that requires a very intentional investment of time and resources into professional learning and professional development. Now, we have a lot of demands on us in terms of time, just time alone, to be able to do that. But I think there are comprehensive ways in which we can build processes that are sustainable that will affect every aspect of not only the work we do, and even how we hire. Now, the political climate that we're in makes that even more difficult, because those who are seeking to sustain positions of power and privilege, they understand the importance of getting access to that history. Because getting access to that history and then beginning to think critically about that then becomes a threat, right? And so it's not just for our students, and I know you know this, but I want to say there's limited time even upon a SCORE student, and I think, there is opportunity, though, to your point, for us to think, how are we getting this information to students, and then how are we, and even you as community, using your voices to influence core curricula in terms of what our students are required to engage, those stories. Because we still have a curriculum, and it's not unique to Shaker, but I think Shaker does better than many districts in terms of moving voices that have historically been on the margins, if not flat out invisible, to the center, of course. So there's required reading across disciplines, so these students are getting exposure to this, right? These historically marginalized historical narratives. One of the things that we wanted to share with you here in terms of community engagement with not just our office, I probably should rephrase that, it's really with the district, but it's our platform today, so we put OIEE. Organized engagement in terms of, 'cause I have a lot of parents, approaching me individually with valid concerns, right? But rarely have I had parents as an organized group approach the office and say, we are dealing with this, we want to work with you around this, we want to hold you accountable to this, that, and the other. That organized engagement is critical. Engaging the data. You talked about data, and we've had some data-related conversations. I'm happy to report that this, if you haven't seen it, the current and our final for this strategic plan, annual report, gives evidence of the district's growth in terms of how we're collecting, reporting, analyzing and reporting data through the lenses of diversity, equity, and inclusion, through the lenses of inclusive excellence. We haven't arrived, but I think you'll see growth there. But we need the community to really dig down into that data, right? And come with us, and many do, with the kinds of questions and concerns, and together we can collaborate, develop strategies to celebrate what we're doing well, but also to identify, the opportunities and the challenges that exist, and recognize those threats that would help us, that prevents us from kind of making the progress we need to make.
I appreciate you broadening that to include our staff and our leadership. And I wonder, how, because this has to be a personal commitment to this growth, not related to just your job performance.
Absolutely.
Right, and so it's hard, and I understand how much our teachers take on, and our staff as well. But I wonder how we can encourage them outside of the frame of doing things just within the frame of their jobs in their school. And as an example, the community has committed to a read of Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here? And so when we talk about learning and understanding how we got to these systems that we have, it takes that kind of learning, right? Which, if we can find a way just to encourage them to plug into things that are happening outside of their jobs, their time in the school building and connecting in the community to do that growth, but it's a personal growth. People have to commit to this.
People have to commit, and we need all of us need again organized groups to hold us accountable. One of the things that I've learned in my experience doing this work, persons in positions of power and privilege can often use that power and privilege to detour into hard work, right? This is very difficult work. And one of the things for institutions and organizations and those who lead them, and I'm not removing myself from this, is being comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Of leaning into the kinds of conversations and analyses, an examination of material and narratives that are often, very marginalized, if not totally excluded. To recognize that as a priority, in fact, an indispensable priority in order to move the needles that we're trying to move. But to move those needles means that we have to deal with the discomfort of really examining not systems as much as ourselves, our own education, our own norms, our own assumptions that we're making that are rooted in gender and race and gender identity and sexual orientation and socioeconomic privilege or the lack thereof. We all have it. And so in my work, I think one of the hardest things, I've come to learn, and Shaker's not different than other institutions doing this work, is moving the needle, because internally you'll get a lot of resistance because people don't want to do that work because it's uncomfortable. So, so Shaker, we're on our third book with the SLT, the Superintendent's Leadership Team. We're about to launch into Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Now, that wasn't the most popular thing for the group to want to lean into, but we're leaning into it. Now, it takes leadership to make that a priority. We started off reading a book called Power, Privilege, and Difference. And then we read Bettina Love's book last year. Yeah, thank you. And so, again, it's not, we haven't arrived, right? But it's begun normalizing, right? Creating intentional spaces and practices that really requires us to lean into it. It's even more difficult now because, again, we now are almost legislating ways for people to detour this work.
I'd like to talk more, we can talk about how this community organized group, just how you see them engaging with the district, because, Dr. Glasner knows there have been community groups formed with that very effort in mind, and they just seem to be there and then they're not. So I'd like to just talk more about what that looks like, because there are many people in this community, and I'm one, who've been in these discussions with our district for years.
And you know, we've been in together since I've arrived, and we made a decision, very intentional one, for a lot of reasons, to celebrate what EAT had accomplished and to discontinue that, with the understanding that the next iteration of that kind of collaboration would be tied to teeing up the next strategic plan, right? Which I believe is the origin, the genesis of EAT with this strategic plan.
It was
One of a couple. So I guess I just say that to say, yeah, we need that. I've shared with Dr. Glassner. I realized that in navigating developments over the past year and a half, I felt like our office, and this is not pointed at anyone, but it's my own recognition, we've kind of isolated ourselves. And Dr. Glassner said, well, how about, using this platform, the series, to begin that process? I've made known that interest to have a community advisory council for our office. We have to position ourselves to hear from you. The district does that well in terms of connecting with people. Our office can do a better job with that, and it starts with me, right? So, yeah.
Thank you.
So I feel like in general, like no organization, you always have to do more with less. And so and again, I'm interested in reading and math, especially in younger grades. When you think about your OIEE, like how do you see balancing the resources and expertise and experience and programs with, an iterative process to help address some of those challenges and gaps in those younger grades? Because I do feel like literacy and being able to read the word problems on the math test, it's hard to succeed in math in 4th grade if you're reading at a 2nd grade level. Mm-hmm. So how are you using, what's your vision for how your office is looking at some of those structural barriers in those younger grades and the support necessary, and how are we targeting those two areas with some of what we've heard?
The question is, how is this our office contributing to closing these gaps? I mean, the process of engaging, yeah.
Every year you reflect and see, are we meeting our drivers to create get our aims, or what expertise can we use from all of these amazing programs and people who are spending time creating these programs and engaging with people to try to work on those specifics?
I will tell you how I, in my career, and since I've been here, have addressed that. I think you've heard some of the work that's being done at the ground level with students and with some families. I believe the heart of and there's a ton of work, and I really invite Dr. Evans, if you want to speak to some of the work through teaching and learning that's going on at the building level with a number of innovative projects that are actually closing some gaps. But I believe, there are a couple of things I want to speak to directly to your question. Yes, there are dwindling resources, but it's been said, and I think it's true, any organization's priorities can be determined based on a critical read of how they're spending their money, by looking at their budget. I really do believe in my heart that professional learning and development it's a priority, but I think we can do better in developing the kind of capacity to help leaders grow in their ability, and that's all of us. We talk about intercultural or culturally informed instruction as an example. How are we helping, are we really effective in helping our teachers and our building leaders and our district leaders creating the kinds of environments, right, that are informed by and responsive to the cultural diversity and the social, economic, and other kinds of issues children are bringing into the classroom, right? We have data, showing, for instance, variances around how students may experience the climate in the classroom, right? In terms of sense of belonging, right? It's one thing to have the data, but we have to help our teachers develop the capacity to effectively take that data and then impact it. We're doing the work. We were building an infrastructure through our office called Equity Liaisons at the building level. These are full-time employees that were stipend. Money started, going short, and so we had to shift that work to coordinators and coaches, right? But I think, and I've introduced a process where we have to assess, well, are our coaches and coordinators, do they have the capacity, the skill set to actually deliver that work? I think that's an opportunity for us to examine that, and we're committed to doing that.
Sorry, just to clarify, were you saying that there's data that shows that African American students in younger elementary school grades don't feel a sense of belonging? And there's a gap there?
There are variances, if you look at the data K through the elementary school, that can be tied to social identity and socioeconomic location. I won't get into the details of that data. That's why I'm engaging, the data's available. That you need to look at the data with us and let's have a critical analysis. And then we can also share what we're doing to try to address that data. We're doing a lot across the board. But again, we have to equip instructors and leadership with the intercultural competencies, the equity mindedness, the understanding of kind of how we got here, how it's informing what we see, beginning to examine our own norms, our own biases. I mean, this has to be an active part of professional learning, and we do it, but I think a lot of the challenges that we're navigating makes it very difficult to do. So if we're going to impact at the classroom level, building level, district level, that's part of the work. It has to influence even how we hire and how we assess candidates, who we're looking for, what are we looking for. Again, we're on.
Ignorance,
Yeah.
not in education.
Mm-hmm.
But when you say bring in professional learning, when teachers have professional learning days, are those mostly outside contracted consultants who come in and do it?
There's a combination. We do have outside contractors coming in and helping with work, but we also do a lot of work within. We have staff, such as Dr. Moore and others that are giving leadership to developing the kinds of work that needs to be done. But again, resources are thin, right? And that's why I think one of the opportunities for us is to make that assessment is, are we most effectively using the resources we have to do that work? I'm not saying we are or we're not, and I'm saying, but that has to be assessed in terms of developing the kinds of skill sets we need to maximize the various types of programs that we're initiating, right now. Are we giving? I've had principals, say to me, it's the training, it's the training that's needed. But again, time is an enemy. We have a lot of pressures that we're under. But how are we creating those spaces so we can do the kind of learning, and how do we assess the learning, right? That we're doing to see if in fact we're having the kind of impact we want, not just simply on the children, but of us, right? We have instituted and we've invested in something called the IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory, which is widely used across the country. We've had staff trained to do certification, and it kind of it assesses kind of where on this particular scale where professionals are in their own intercultural development, and we have that data. The next step is developing curricula for staff to learn, a scaffolded approach to learn and grow and to continue that assessment as we grow. We're on the journey, but but again, we've come, Shaker's come a long way, but there's a long way to go. And the current pressures that we're navigating makes it difficult, but we can't use that as an excuse not to continue, and not that we are, to do that hard work around that in these areas. Yeah.
I'm in medicine, so I think a lot about quality improvement. So you think about what's your aim, you think about the drivers all the different stakeholder and all the drivers that are needed to achieve that aim. And then you think about all the all the interventions that need to take place to maybe achieve one of those key drivers, and then you assess it in an iterative process. So I was just curious to hear some.
Yeah. Well, institutions are, in this journey are, there's, I think we have resolved. I think, institutions, and again, this is not unique to Shaker, have to be willing to be very transparent, celebrating what we do well, and being honest about what we're not. But that we continue to be committed to get better, right?
Can I add?
Please. Here.
Actually, coming from the field of medicine, some things actually that originated from the Office of Inclusive Excellence and Engagement. We have a instructional rounds model, which is based off the medical rounds model. We call it in Shaker an equity-oriented instructional rounds, really with the goal being of, and it's driven internally. Our Office of then DEI, now OIEE, has helped support it. Now our instructional coaches, coordinators, and principals support it at the building level. It is an opportunity for teachers, students, and other community members to visit classrooms with a real focus on what is the classroom experience like, particularly for students that are historically marginalized or underrepresented. How can we improve that experience in order to affect change in reading, mathematics, and other academic outcomes? We've also implemented a model around multi-tiered system of support. You probably saw or heard a board presentation about that recently, where we're looking at the experience that all of our students are having, and it is related to academics, sense of belonging, social and emotional learning supports, to make sure that all students are accessing and benefiting from rigorous, challenging, and supportive education, curriculum, and standards, and that there are opportunities to provide additional supports and resources for students who need that. So those are two examples. I think we certainly have room to grow, but I do think, actually one last example, we have principals who are leading, again, with the support of OIEE, professional learning in buildings that is specifically focused on the learning experiences and outcomes of students who have historically been marginalized or underrepresented, or where there are disparities in outcomes, leading staff-wide professional learning with a clear focus on academic learning outcomes, because ultimately that's how we're measured, right? I mean, and so there's a lot of work. I very much agree. There is additional work to be done. Engaging with the data by our community members is certainly part of the process, and continuing to support professional learning to help expand the capacity.
Is there a way you said community members can attend the equity round?
I believe we have parents who participate in,
Not this year, I don't
not this year, sorry. But that's something that we can consider for the future. Sorry for misspeaking there.
Resources are a challenge, and I think going through navigating the challenges that we're facing. If you take a close look at our org chart, even in our office, and it's impacting the whole district, not just our office. But it's hiring and retaining the expertise within. I mean, bringing in consultants and that's a lot. That's a very expensive, and it's not a sustainable way of doing the work, right? It's not cost effective. But really assessing what's the staffing infrastructure that's needed in order to do this work well over time. I think Shaker has invested over the years. It's ahead of the game of a lot of districts. I've talked to colleagues across the country, and they looked at what we've been doing, and they're kind of like, wow, we don't see this very often. But my thing is, I just want to make sure we don't go backward, and that we're moving forward and building on the foundation that, because of the work that's been done to date, helps us continue to move this work forward. I'm looking at the time. Are there other questions? That's the crew.
It's like maybe if we have a few more minutes here. One of the numbers
Yeah.
that just stuck with me since the school report card discussion in the fall was the chronic absenteeism, and a challenge across the school, but like 50% of our African American students chronically absent. Like it's very challenging to learn if you're not sitting in the classroom every day. And so like I'm curious, like what's the office doing? What sort of initiatives are going on to try to support the students and then the staff to make those positive interventions to drive a change?
Well, the work is going on across the district. I mean, there are offices represented here and others that are doing the work. But in terms of our office in particular, I'm transparent, and I'll be transparent here. One of the things I think is an opportunity for us, there's 2.7 in the strategic plan. Anybody know what 2.7 talks about in the strategic plan? But it's a commitment that the district made 5 years ago to hire more African American teachers or teachers from underrepresented racial ethnic populations, right? The research is really clear, and you see this show up across districts with similar demographics as Shaker, where qualified African American teachers have actual value in helping to impact academic achievement, impact it in a positive way, the disciplinary data, school absenteeism, and the impact it has value for students who are not Black, right? Seeing others. I think.
Is there a correlation in Shaker? Have you gone and looked like?
There's a correlation. I mean, in some of our numbers, in some areas, in terms of the actual demographics of the workforce, has improved in some areas, and we've kind of taken some step backwards in some areas in terms of the actual numbers. It's not just about numbers; it's about qualified teachers, right? To do that.
I think what he's saying is, what is the district doing to impact our attendance, truancy, attendance officers, who's communicate with our families to get the students in? I think that's what he's asking.
I might be able to help. I might be able to make that connection to how OIEE is helping support as well. So we have a district attendance committee, and Keith Langford sits on the district committee. And we meet almost every month to look at our district-wide data. Then we support each of our building attendance committees. And so each building attendance committee is either made up of a student support coordinator, a school counselor, and one of the school administrators. And so what they're doing every week with help of our administrative assistants is identifying which students aligned to our MTSS process are Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So our Tier 1 things, some things we've done with Stay in the Game, Sign the Community, things that you see community-wide. Tier 2 supports that we put in place are actual absence intervention plans that we put in place for students once they reach a certain threshold. And then our Tier 3 things that we put in place are actually home visits. And Keith and Shanita in the office have actually support home visits to students that are very chronically absent. I think one thing that I would ask of the community, very similar to what you talked about, is we know that a lot of our students most marginalized don't have access to health care. Those are many of the reasons why we see our students with chronic asthma, right? And things that we see, how our broader system impacts how our students are able to get to school, how families are able to get students to school. Our McKinney-Vento students, our students that are unhoused, we see have higher rates of chronic absenteeism. So there are a lot of factors that go into it, but we used our MTSS process as a way to structure resources and support based on Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 needs aligned to the data that we see. And we've seen some success. The middle school shared at the last board meeting some success that we've seen with decreasing our chronic absenteeism rate, increasing our attendance rate at our middle school. So there are definitely some things put in place. I mean, obviously we have lots of room to grow, but we're trying to do it from a systems level and look at it that way with help from our face office.
I appreciate that because I think there's this assumption that the school can just resolve the problem of kids being absent when there are so many things impacting why these students are not in school, which all go back to how we got here. Systems in place that have generationally impacted families and kept this continuum of lack of education because there is lack of support to get education at the parent level. So I can get a degree and I can have a stable job and keep a home for my kid. There's just all this underlying content that our kids have to try to navigate, and so they don't show up at school. But having the things in place that you guys are talking about are those small things that we can do, and I think the district is attempting to do, and I would like to see every effort that can be made in those spaces, but it is not a simple problem to solve.
Well, and I think Ludlow is a perfect example of exactly what you talked about, is that we have created, doubled the amount of access that we have to high-quality, not only childcare, but educational experiences, which then allow families to be able to access jobs, to be able to access schooling while we're taking care of their babies, right? So it is those pieces that we continue to find ways to use our limited resources to impact.
Could I just real quick, the foundation has provided 255 right RTA passes to the high school. And working with Pat Rashid, the assistant principal, that is helping with tardies and absences because transportation is an issue for our high school kids. So that's one small thing that we can do.
And I do, okay, if I could just say this, and I'll give it to you. I think, but again, I'm always going to go back to professional learning and development, right? For teachers. Well, but again, there's research that are saying that for some students, why they're not coming. What are they experiencing in the classroom? Right? For some, why do they walk the halls? For some, right? For parents, McKinney-Vento or others, because I don't want to just stereotype McKinney-Vento, marginalized families, what is their experience when they're working with staff, right? I mean, we need to help our staff. We have good people working, but in terms of intercultural competency or intercultural or culturally responsive, be it teaching or culturally responsive service delivery from staff working at, in the desk, there has to be cultural awareness, again, about even our own biases in terms of how I even see you when you walk in the door. What's going on in my mind? Am I judging you? I mean, what's going on within me internally, and how might that show up in terms of how I'm going to engage you on behalf of the district? That's part of the work as well, right? Having an understanding of that kid who may be McKinney-Vento and having a kind of an empathetic level of understanding of what this child might be, what's our awareness of what's going on in their homes, right? It's very complex, and it's a marathon. And we're doing a number of things. Some of the things that Dr. Evans mentioned, there are things that we're doing, and we need to celebrate and strengthen that, but we also need to be really clear about what we're not doing and what we can do better. I think there's a commitment there, but again, we have to keep our hand on that. Was there another comment? Oh, Will, I'm sorry.
No, I wanted to kind of go back to your piece about getting them there, and then also the motivations for our students once they get to the building or when they get to the building, why they want to continue to show up on time, why they want to go from class to class to class as they get older. Student programming, well, not just from student programming, from my position as student programming coordinator and having been a part of PBIS, one of the things that we talk about a lot is intervening in that early enough and also making sure that we're supporting students, families, their teachers and whatnot, and making sure that they're all aware of some of the realities that students are facing. At the high school, a student that has this set of teachers, this principal, this counselor, and maybe in this student group, all of those people involved in that, from the advisors to the teachers to the building leadership, are made aware of what that student is going through or experiencing, obviously confidentially, right? That student, especially if that student has siblings in the district or, is whatever the case may be, so that we're all aware of what's going on, and then we can all collaborate on how best to help that student. It'll be a student that's in SCORE, who's navigating a challenge. I talk to their guidance counselor. I talk to their AP, and we're all kind of on a string to make sure we're supporting that. But again, there's no one size fits all, like Dr. Brownlee said. Again, we've come a long way, got a long way to go.
Somebody made the observation during the sub-zero temperatures or wind chills. We closed some days we were open. And a colleague at a meeting made the observation around equity. While we have kids coming to the buildings, your parents dropping them off at the high school. And I think this colleague said picking up their lattes before they come to school. And we other kids are walking. Mr. Langford saw a kid walking to school, dropping off her sister. She didn't even have a coat. She had a sweater. Now, is it the district's responsibility to take care of all of those issues? No, but our awareness of the inequities and how it disproportionately impacts, members of our population is something that we're trying to do better, and to, develop resources and responses in collaboration with building leadership, in collaboration with FACE, with PTO, to really see the inequities and develop strategies to effectively address them. We're doing it. But I think, again, I'm a professional learning stickler about how we continue to, create these intentional spaces to help us grow, all of us, as it relates to these issues. We're about at time. Dr. Glaston, did you want to say some closing remarks?
Just a thank you. Thank you to everybody for coming. Thank you to Dr. Burnley, to Ms. Siggers, to Mr. Warren for presenting this evening. This will be posted on our website. I definitely encourage you to encourage your friends and neighbors and others to watch it, to engage with this conversation. If you have follow-up questions or ideas, please feel free to reach out. And again, there will be some more community engagement opportunities as part of the Superintendent Series coming up in March and April. Thank you very much, and have a great evening, everyone.